Welcome back to Time for an Awakening. And tonight we're going to talk about a subject that's always near and dear to the hearts of myself and Brother Reggie in the Time for an Awakening radio program. We always like to talk about things that can break the bonds of ignorance on our people and get them to look at critically things that they're doing, things that we believe in, things that we take for granted are spiritual in nature and spiritual truths. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to read a article that was posted on the Time for an Awakening webpage from blacknews.com. It's entitled, "Why Some People Don't Celebrate Christmas." Christmas is the world's biggest holiday, and it's fast approaching. Nearly 2 billion people will be celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ this December 25th, but there are millions out there who choose not to celebrate Christmas at all because of its pagan origin. It was not until more than 300 years after the birth of Christ that Christendom officially began to observe Christmas on December 25th. Interestingly, the mid-17th century, an act of Parliament banned Christmas celebrations in England and in the United States. The Massachusetts General Court did the same. Why? The book, The Battle for Christmas, says Christmas was nothing but a pagan festival covered with Christian veneer. The root of Christmas can be traced back to pagan Rome, with its mixture of festivals for honoring the agricultural god Saturn and the sun god Sol Invictus, or Mithra. Anthropologists, we kind of know the rest of it. We also know that a lot of these holidays, because we're in that quote-unquote holiday season, Thanksgiving and heading into the Christmas celebration, that we know that when we came to the shores of this country, our people was not celebrating Thanksgiving or Christmas. Thanksgiving is a definite American holiday with the staples of the holiday, turkey and cranberry sauce, things that was introduced to them by the Native Americans that helped them survive. At Christmas also, the same principle. Our people were not celebrating these days, but as time went on, we were allowed to come out of the fields and join with our families, have mock celebrations, and our people started picking up these celebrations as a part of their own.
And to add, during Christmas time, that was the only time that the slave master allowed the slaves to have a limited amount of freedom. And actually, when you're talking about the mocking portion, was because they gave them rations of certain food, and part of the main rations was liquor, because they would love to see the slaves get drunk and have a lot of folly going on. That was one of the passions of letting the slaves have basically that time off for that time period. So I want you to let the listening audience know that also, Elliot.
Mm-hmm. Tonight, we're going to look into these things with somebody that's familiar to our program. Author, publisher, cultural historian, and artist, Dr. Tony Browder will be joining us to talk about the African origin of Judaism and Christianity. Dr. Browder.
Good morning, brothers. Actually, good evening, brothers. How are you?
How you doing, my brother?
How are you,
great.
sir?
I'm great. How are you?
Great.
Fantastic.
Dr. Browder, this is to some of our people, it's a sensitive subject, because when you talk about religious observances or holidays, they're inexplicably linked to the religions that our people popularly believe in this country of our former chattel enslavement. Talk about why, in your opinion, that our people in particular refuse to talk about religion.
Well, we only talk about what we know. And most people of African ancestry who live in America are Christians because they were enslaved by people who are Christians. Most people who are conquered, who are enslaved, take on the religious traditions of their conquerors and or enslavers. And when someone enslaves you and introduces you to their concept of God, that's not to save your soul. It's to keep you psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually under their control. So during the first 200 years that Africans were enslaved in America, we were not allowed to participate in any Christian celebrations whatsoever. It was only after the Haitian Revolution, it was only after European enslavers in America were afraid that Africans would rise up, that they began to develop strategies to introduce Africans into Christianity. And the methods of Christianity that were introduced into Africans were designed specifically to keep them spiritually enslaved. So that's when they began to give Africans time off to celebrate Christmas. And as the brother said, gave us alcohol to keep us drunk, and more specifically began to teach specific religious instructions to selected Negroes within the plantation environment and train them to recite passages from the Bible that validated, according to God's traditions, validated slavery and dictated that there would be a position of a slave and a slave master. And they used those passages in order to keep Africans who were enslaved in Americas sedate and to teach them that they would get their reward in the great by and by. So conquerors and enslavers have no vested interest in teaching the people that they conquer or enslave the truth about religious traditions. So most black people in America only know what they've been told by their preachers. And they don't know religion in the literal sense. They only know what they've been taught, and they have been taught to believe. And a belief is the suspension of thought. Belief is the suspension of judgment, critical thinking. And so it is a requirement within the Christian faith that one must be a believer in order to be a true participant in that particular religion.
Dr. Browder, in your opinion, how dangerous is it for our religious leaders, be it imams, pastors, or rabbis, to present falsehoods as sacred truths?
Well, how dangerous is it? The media is one of the most powerful forms of mind control, mental manipulation ever devised. Television, radio, the computer. Prior to the creation of the media as the means of mind control, religion was the most powerful form of mind control. And one of the most powerful images of controlling people's minds was controlling people's image of God. You know, as Dr. John Henry Clark used to say, that one of the most damning things ever done to African people was to have someone take away their spiritual traditions and then rewrite them and present them to African people as the creation of Europeans, and then to change the image of the African concept of the Creator or God and make that Creator white and present that image to them as their only salvation. So if we think about the fact that Africans were the first human beings on the planet, Africans have lived on the planet Earth for literally hundreds of thousands of years for any other so-called race existed on this planet. So the first human beings to conceive a concept of God, and God is a man-made concept. Religion is a man-made concept. Religion, God takes on the anthropomorphic characteristics of man because man created God. God didn't create man. Man created God. And so Africans were the first people to conceive of an unseen entity that was responsible for the creation of the universe, responsible for the creation and maintenance of all life. So how is it that people who are classified as Europeans, who represent less than 1/10 of the world's population, have the only legitimate interpretation of God or the Creator, and that Creator looks like them, and they were latecomers on the planet? So when you begin to delve into these historical issues, because we're talking about history now, we're not talking about religion or anything, we're talking about history right now.
Okay.
And when you deal with religion, religion requires that you suspend any understanding of history. Now, if you take a history class, there are specific things that one has to learn in history, the various ages of the dinosaurs and Paleolithic ages and what have you. But when it comes to religion, all of that stuff, all of that historical knowledge is put on hold. And you are told to believe that a being named God created the universe approximately 6,000 years ago. So forget all of the paleontological evidence. Forget all of the geological evidence that attest to the fact that this universe is something closer to 6 billion years old. But the people who crafted the Bible in its current state said that God created the universe, the heaven and the earth, 6,000 years ago. So that historical memory had to be erased in order for this new ideology, which was called Christianity, could take hold and to hold fast to the minds of the people who were taught to believe in this distorted reality. And that's essentially what it is. It is a distorted reality, because once you can peep behind the curtain, so to speak, and understand the foundations of religion, foundations of Judaism, or the foundations of Christianity, you realize that it does not have a historical leg to stand on.
Dr. Browder, I'd like to follow up and ask you a question. If someone makes a statement, Western religion, is Western religion a misnomer? Is that a falsehood? If you're looking back critically, if you're examining history, then Western religion, Western philosophy, it stems further back from what you're stating to me.
All right, well look, let's look at this thing literally.
Okay.
You can say there is such a thing as Western religion, because people who came from the West created this religion and presented it to the world as the only legitimate religion. So in that context, you can say there is a Western religion. But in a larger historical context, that what is passed off as Western religion is a microscopic copy of ancient African spiritual traditions that existed thousands of years before any person from the so-called West, any person who was classified as European or Jewish, walked this planet.
So if I'm teaching a child about religion and I want to tell them the truth, me telling them about Western religion is only giving them a minimal scope of what true religion is?
Right. You're cheating that child. You're cheating that child. You're not starting that child off with the beginning of historical memory. If you're going to be fair and honest with that child, whether it's a small child or an adult child, you should be honest with that person and begin at the beginning. And the beginning is that the very first human beings, the very first Homo sapiens sapiens on this planet, were human beings who evolved in Africa. And that over a period of hundreds of thousands of years, the other so-called races speciated from these Africans as they moved out of the continent of Africa, north, east, and west. And over, again, a period of hundreds of thousands of years, speciated or evolved to become the other so-called races that now inhabit this planet. So let's begin at the beginning. The first human beings were African. The first civilization was African. The oldest documented civilization that I could speak of with any degree of intelligence right now in 2012 is Nile Valley civilization. They were the first people to give humanity a concept of God, a concept of a creator, a concept of a soul and the process for the salvation of a soul, a concept of heaven and the steps that one's soul must go through in order to go to heaven and then be reborn back on earth. All of these are African ideas. But if you are to control African people, then you must separate Africans from their homeland, separate Africans from their own historical, cultural, and spiritual traditions, and then assign these attributes to the conquerors and enslavers of African people. And then the world becomes distorted, and that is the story that everyone begins with.
So, Dr. Browder, I just want to get a little more clarity for myself and for the listening audience. Now, you had made a statement a little earlier about Africans and their conceptualization of God. So you're telling me if you believe in Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, the first thing that you need to reconcile in your mind is that you're dealing with an entity that you've never seen that's invisible. Is that correct?
Well, of course. Nobody's ever seen God. Nobody's ever seen God.
I just want to be sure I heard you right. Okay.
Nobody. Now, listen, we have in the Old Testament and the New Testament these stories, countless stories of people who saw God or saw a burning bush or heard the voice of God. And these stories have been accepted in these books, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and in the Quran. Muhammad tells the story of Allah revealing the Quran to him in a cave. Now, Muhammad was illiterate, could not read or write, and yet he is said to have produced this book. So if we apply the same criteria that one would apply in any court of law or any scientific community to these books, they wouldn't stand up. There are people walking the streets of Philadelphia right now who say that they talk to God. They're classified as crazy. I've met people, lecturing and traveling around the world who tell me that they talk to God and God is giving them these instructions. And I kind of look at them askew because I know that there, quote unquote, is no God in the traditional sense of the word. God was a concept that was created by man, the mind of man, in order to help man understand the impossible. So if you look at it in that context, then it all begins to make sense. And these texts could be used to liberate you as opposed to holding you religiously incarcerated.
So what you're saying is that the original man, in order for them for that person, individual, or community to be able to rationalize what was around them, the rain coming from the sky, the sun, this is how they had to develop. This is what they had to do to develop, to be able to rationalize and conceptualize their living or their being?
To keep their sanity and to grow, right? And if we're honest, if we're truly honest, we keep using this word God, which is a male term. Mm-hmm. But if we're really honest, the first symbols of the Creator were female. The first God was a goddess. And just think of it in this context. The woman gives birth. She's a creator. The woman is a goddess. The woman bleeds every month. And blood is a symbol of death, yet she continues to live. The first representations of a creator were female. And it was only after, specifically after European males began this era of male domination and control, that they suppressed all feminine interpretations of the creator and then created this story, fabricated this story, this lie, if you will, and excuse me for being truthful, but this lie of Adam and Eve. Now, there is no Adam and Eve in the biblical sense of the word. That story is not true. And if you talk to any rabbi, if you talk to any theologian who is going to a theological institution, not someone who all of a sudden was smitten by the word of God and decided that they were going to become a preacher, but if you talk to someone who has studied religious texts, they will tell you that the story of Adam and Eve is an allegory, that story is not true. So as a minister friend shared with me years ago, a very simple and powerful statement. He said, Tony, the Bible contains truth, but the Bible is not true. And so it means that you have to know the truth in order to find the pearls of wisdom that are in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. You have to know the truth because the truth is there. And the last thing in the world that any thinking person would do, any conscious person would do, would be to take these books, these texts literally.
You know, you mentioned, Dr. Browder, that the Bible in its current state.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to go back to that because we can see that the Bible, if you really start looking at religion critically, that is froth full of deliberate distortions of spiritual truth. Being that the subject matter tonight is the African origin of Judaism and Christianity, we can see that historically the belief in Judaism predated Christianity. Now, I don't want to get the things mixed up. I believe that through historical study that the African Hebrews, quote unquote, that migrated out of certain areas didn't necessarily start Judaism. Judaism and Jewish are two different things to me. But going back, we can see that the Nile Valley civilizations, and Egyptians in particular, is inexplicably linked to the Bible in its current state, even though the Bible is froth full of disparaging remarks, references to Egypt and Africa being heathenistic. But we can see that the cultures of those people were inexplicably linked. Abraham, if you look back at the scripture, when he traveled, he was sent, supposedly according to the text, into Egypt. The 12 sons of Jacob were sent into Egypt. Jacob himself went down there. Moses was born there, which spawned the 10 Commandments. And we can see that those things are inexplicably linked. Talk about the deliberate distortions of... I
just want to follow up something that you said. Even if you're following in the story about Moses, and Moses coming down the Nile, if you look at where the Nile River starts, it starts where Uganda is right now in the continent. So just things for you just to think about. This is why we're having this discussion with Dr. Browder, just to open our minds up, to have conversations and discussions about things that we normally don't talk about. We don't need to be afraid to open up the book, because if whatever you believe in is going to stand on two legs, it has to be tested at some point.
Well, let me say this, and perhaps I should have said this at the top of the interview, that this conversation is not for everybody. And we're not engaged in this conversation in order to tick people off, in order to frighten people, in order to challenge anybody's belief system. Everybody has the right to believe what they want to believe. That's your right. And the last thing in the world I'm trying to do is to take that away from you. But I also understand very clearly that no one has the right to impose their belief on me or anybody else. Nobody has that right. And so what we're doing this evening is having an intelligent discussion about religion and the evolution of religion. So if I can just state a couple of facts, and I only speak of what I know. I only speak of what I have learned, what I have seen with my own eyes, what I know. I don't talk about what I believe, because that takes you down a slippery slope. And, beliefs don't really have a place in meaningful and intelligent conversation.
You have to say that one more time for us, Dr. Browder. Please say that one more time, brother.
Say what one more time?
What you just the last statement.
Well, look,
you talk about what you see.
I know and not what I believe.
Okay.
A belief requires a suspension of intelligent thought. Because you're not supposed to question. When you believe in Jesus, you're not supposed to question the Bible. Just as when you believe in Santa Claus. This is when you believe in the Easter Bunny. When you believe in these things, you're not supposed to question the source that gave you that belief. So as Stevie Wonder said in his song Superstition, when you believe in things that you don't understand, you suffer. And I submit to you that one of the reasons why African people living in America specifically have been suffering is because we have accepted without question the belief system of people that we should have questioned, people that we never should have trusted in the first place. Just from a very basic level, how is it possible? I started to say how in the hell, but how is it possible for a person who enslaved your great-great-grandparents, who raped your great-great-grandmother, who castrated your great-great-grandparents, how is it possible for those people to teach you about God? It's not possible. And if you knew their story, if you knew the story of the enslavers, if you knew the story that the very first slave ship from England that brought African people from the continent to the Americas was a ship that was called the Good Ship Jesus, then you would question who these people were and why they gave you this particular story. If you knew that when these white slave captains loaded these enslaved Africans on board the slave ship, that they would, whenever it was possible, make sure that they loaded one man and one woman first onto the slave ship, and they would record that African man and that African woman in the ship's log as Adam and Eve, and everyone else would be numbered. If you knew that these European slave captives believed that if the slave ship set sail on Sunday, that God would bless their journey. See, if black folk knew these things, if we were taught these things when we were young, we would question with great introspection this whole Bible, and we would be able to see it for what it is and discard the Bible that was given to us by our enslavers and pick up the religious text, the spiritual text that were given to us by Africans. My colleague James Small, in a segment of this new documentary called Hidden Colors 2 that we're in, James Small makes a very cogent point when he says that Africans living in America, which is the third largest population of Africans on this planet, Africans living in the Americas are the most, hands down, the most religious people on the planet. the most religious people on the planet. So we have the European Christian doctrines that we subscribe to. We have the Jewish European doctrines that we subscribe to. We have the Arab Islamic doctrines that we subscribe to. And we hold on to other people's gods. We call gods by the names of other people, but we don't know one African name for God. And we were the first human beings to give the world a God concept. So when we stop and look at that and question these issues, they would make you begin to reevaluate who we are and where it is we must go in life. So there was a question that you asked me a while ago, and I've forgotten what the question is.
Well, we're gonna take a brief break, and when we come back, Jacob and Ollie and Phil is up, and we'll be right back with cultural memory specialist Dr. Tony Browder. We'll be right back. From antiquity to the present, our people need to develop a new paradigm. It's time for an awakening. Sundays, 7 p.m. with your hosts, Elliot and Reggie, on WRD. Welcome back to Time for an Awakening, and we're joined in conversation this evening with cultural memory specialist, author, publisher, and historian, Dr. Tony Browder. The subject matter, the African origin of Judaism and Christianity, and we're going to go straight to the phones. We go to Jacob and Ollie. Jacob.
Peace be unto you, Brother Elliot, Reggie.
Jacob, how you doing, my brother?
Doctor, peace be unto you. Of course, y'all know I was going to call, right?
Yeah, we know.
No. I mean, no. Hey, look, I'm agreeing with all I heard the brother say about Africa, how long the first people, on the planet Earth. I agree with all of that. But I just want to make a little correction as a Muslim. Muhammad never said that Allah gave him the Quran. Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, he said he saw, who taught him the Quran. Yeah, and Gabriel told him he was sent from Allah. So the Prophet never said that he saw Allah. So I just wanted to correct that, But and then I say again, I have no problem with what the doctor said about Africa, the people of Africa in the beginning or whatever. But I still believe in the oneness. There's a one creator, we call it, that we have not seen, that I believe in. And I don't claim to be a scholar of nothing. I claim to be an average human being. But in my soul, and this would work for me, because I believe if there was more than one God, they'd be fighting about who the champ. So the belief that I have says that there's only one God, and that's what I believe in. One creator, one force, you can call it whatever you want. The name doesn't make a difference to me. As a Muslim, I call him Allah. But and the Quran teaches me to search for things. Once you say you got this, it tells us, it invites us to go out and search for other things so that we can have something to compare, trying to make it real compared to what. And I've been to Africa, I've been to Egypt, but I want to know, Doc, is there anywhere in Africa, and I'm not really being facetious or playing, I want to know, is there any place in Africa where this knowledge that you say is taught and lived?
Well, I want to thank the caller for the correction, and he is absolutely right with regards to Gabriel, and I stand on that correction, and thank you for correcting me.
Thank you. I'll hang up and listen.
Thank you, Jacob.
Okay, you're welcome. And his approach toward his belief system is the way that people should use that. Everybody's religion, as I said earlier, everyone has the right to believe whatever they want to believe, but whatever your belief system is, it should help bring out the best within you. And no one has the right to impose their belief system on someone else. If you believe in Allah, if you believe in Yeshua, if you believe in God or Jesus or Yahweh, then that belief system should help you love yourself and love everybody else. And you should love them enough in order to respect their interpretation of the Creator, whatever that interpretation is. Nobody has the right to impose their belief of the unseen on someone else simply because they haven't seen what you haven't seen. So the question was, is there anywhere in Africa where some of the things that I have been talking about can be found? And I can say from my own personal experience, I've been traveling to Egypt for 32 years. I've been to Egypt 48 times. And I'm currently involved in the excavation of a tomb, a 25th dynasty tomb in Luxor, Egypt, the tomb of a priest named Karak Amun, or Karak Amen. The same word that Jews use, the same word that Christians use, the same word that Muslims use, Amen. Amen is an ancient Kemetic word, and Kemet is the original name for the country that the Greeks renamed Egypt. So that is the word that...
Repeat that again for some of our Hebrew brothers out there. Repeat that.
Kemet is the original name for the country that the Greeks called Egypt. Egypt is a Greek word that was used to describe the temple of Ptah in the city of Mennefer. Ptah was the ancient African personality. The term we use to describe him is Neter, but if you listen to a white Egyptologist, they will refer to Ptah as a god, and they will use that term to say that the ancient residents of the Nile Valley believed in the multiplicity of gods, which is not true. From the very beginning, they acknowledged one source of creation, and that every being, every angel, if you want to use that term, emanated from that one being. And so it's by studying the many aspects of the one being that you can come to know the one, because the mind of man is too fragile, too infantile, to even begin to comprehend 1/10 of the concept of the Creator. I mean, and that's just real. And so we have to create things. We have to create this image of God that looks just like us. But we say that man was created in the image of God. Ain't no proof of that whatsoever. We have to say that God chose these people as their chosen people. But there's no evidence of that whatsoever. But we have to say that in order to satisfy our infantile minds. But in the tomb of Karak Amun, or Karak Amen. And Amen is a Kemetic word that means the unseen presence of God, unseen presence of the Creator. That's an African word. Amen recognizes the unseen presence of the Creator. And in this tomb of this priest who died 2,700 years ago, he died 700 years before Jesus Christ was born. In his tomb, we have a copy of the world's oldest religious text. It is a text that is erroneously referred to today as the pyramid text, not because it was found inside of a pyramid, but because it was found in a tomb underneath a pyramid, more specifically the pyramid of Unas, a 5th dynasty king, the last king of the 5th dynasty. And in these texts, it states specifically where the soul of the deceased person goes in heaven to be reborn. And it gives you a specific location where that soul goes to be reborn. It states in this text, and we got it. We got a copy of it. And this is the oldest religious text ever found. It dates back to approximately 2300 BC, before Abraham, before the Torah, before Moses, before Muhammad. This is documented, so we don't have to make anything up. We don't have to ask anybody to believe anything. I can take you to this location and show you the text because it's there in the tomb that we're excavating. I can take you to Saqqara, Egypt, inside of the burial chamber of Unas, and show you that the exact same text is on the wall. So we don't have to make anything up. And the point that I'm saying is that if we can take the time to know ourselves or to rescue our African memories, we will realize that everything we need to save our souls, if in fact our souls need to be saved, everything we need was recorded first by the first human beings on the planet. So I'm a strong advocate of always getting my information directly from the source, and not from second-hand or third-hand sources, particularly if those sources were responsible for enslaving my ancestors and minimizing our value on the world stage. The information is there if you're willing to do the work and go and seek it out.
Dr. Browder, just to follow up what Jacob asked, on the continent of Africa, is Kemetic rites and spirituality, is it being practiced today? I think that's some of the question he was asking.
Well, it definitely isn't being practiced in Egypt today, because Egypt has been conquered by Arabs since 648. So every last vestige of that ancient tradition is gone. And even before the Arabs came in, Justinian and Theodosius outlawed these teachings. Now, what you will find is that there are vestiges of these ancient practices that are still being used in the Vatican. You'll find vestiges of these ancient African spiritual traditions that are still being used among the Dogon in Mali, in West Africa, but then the Dogon are under attack by Arabs right now who consider them pagans. So African spiritual traditions are still under attack because there has been a concerted effort for at least the last 2,000 years to eliminate any trace, any footprint, any fingerprint of an African origin of a theological concept.
Let's go to Phil in North Philadelphia. Phil?
Yes, good evening, Brother Elliott.
How are you, Phil?
I'm doing pretty good.
Stranger Phil, how are you, sir?
Yes, sir. What's up, Brother Red?
How you making out?
Oh, man, I'm hanging in there just watching the movie go around. We on our way. And good evening to your guest, Dr. Browder.
Good evening, brother. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. For the sake of time, I'm not going to get too long-winded. But are you familiar with the word Tamahu? That was supposed to have been the European when he first got here, the first white guy that was made by our scientists, the Tamahu.
Not familiar with that term, brother.
Okay. And my second question has something to do with Pangaea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now you know the lineage on Pangaea. How we had dominated the whole planet, and then the story of Yaku, who made Yakun, which was the Tamahu. That's right. What I was referring to. And my last question is: are you familiar with the word the Ba? It was ancient Kemetic
word. The Ka, the Ba. These are all Kemetic aspects of what we would call the soul or the aspects of our being.
Yeah.
But let me just share this with you, brother. I'm from Chicago, born and raised in Chicago. I've been living in the D.C. area for over 40-some-odd years. And in 1972, a very close friend of my family, who was a member of the Nation of Islam, gave me my copy of my Quran, a copy of a Quran, which I still have. Mm-hmm. And he very close friend. Matter of fact, I just spoke with him the other day. His birthday was last week. He's now 82 years old. Good brother. And he shared with me the story of Yaqub. And the story at 1972, that story was a little bit too much for me to grasp. And I had read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and he referenced Yaqub, the big-head scientist. But, I really couldn't wrap my mind around that. And then 10 years later, 1982, when I went back to Chicago to visit this same brother, he said, now, Tony, and I just shared with him in the 10 years since we had that initial conversation, I've read a lot, I've learned a lot, and now I'm ready for the next phase of the lesson. And in that study session, the brother told me, now, Tony, one of the things that you have to understand, that story of Yaqub is a metaphor. It's not a real story. There was no real person named Yaqub. And see, and this is where this thing gets to be a little dicey, because we believe in stories and allegories as the real thing. They are instruments that are designed to teach certain lessons.
Yes.
They are instruments, right? But don't take the story literally. See, because let me just talk briefly on 2 points that the brother made. He referenced Pangaea. These are two words, Pangaea. Gea meaning earth, and Pan meaning one. So Pangaea represents a point in time, millions of years ago, when there was one solid land mass. And then because
thank you, Phil, for your call.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And there are these things called tectonic plates, where the earth sits on these plates, and these plates move apart. And so as these plates move apart, these land masses separated. So if you look at a globe, you will see that you can take all of the so-called continents and kind of piece them together. And you can see this Pangaea concept is real. Africa is the only continent which did not move. All of the other land masses pulled apart from Africa. Africa is the only continent which is almost perfectly located, situated north and south of the equator. And you can fit Europe into Africa. You can fit Saudi Arabia into Africa. You can put India into Africa and the Americas. You can piece them all in. And the brother was right. The first human beings on this planet who originated from Africa moved across the entire planet when it was almost one solid landmass. But over time, the land separated and the knowledge was lost. And the people began to find ways to regain aspects of that knowledge. So that is the evolution for different theologies. And then as these Africans moved out of Africa into Asia, into India, into the Americas, as they adapted to their environment, they changed color, right? They changed hair color. They changed eye color. And as Sheikh Diop says in his book, Civilization of Barbarism, it was the Africans who were caught behind a 13-mile-high wall of ice for 10,000 years. And that is what led to the speciation of the people who now classify themselves as European or white. So we can't even begin to think about what happened to these Africans when they lost their melanin, when they had to fight for survival, and were separated from these concepts of the creator that has sustained them for literally hundreds of thousands of years, and they developed a different mindset. They literally lost their souls. And these are the people who came back into Africa to attempt to civilize themselves and reacquaint themselves to some aspects of African spirituality. It is these people who have now given the world the concept of religion that has literally been responsible for the death of more people than will ever be saved by any of these religions.
Let's try to squeeze one or two more, and let's go to Hannibal in North Philadelphia. Hannibal?
Yes, good evening.
How are you, Hannibal?
Yes, Brother Reggie, Brother Greg, another outstanding dialogue. Hello, Professor Browder. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, brother. Thank you for calling.
I'm a neophyte of the Browder Files, and you just mentioned melanin, that biochemical substance which gives us pigmentation on the outer side of our skin. In the Browder Files, you talk heavily about that. And melanin, back in the days with Carol Barnes and them, they were heavily criticized because they felt people that were talking about melanin was becoming too metaphysical. And you talk about metaphysical being outer consciousness. Can you elaborate on melanin a little bit and our blackness and our consciousness from a practical application point of view? And I'll get off and listen, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Thank you,
appreciate that. And I'll make this real short because we can talk forever about this. But melanin is the visible aspect. Melanin in our skin is the visible aspect. But what we don't see is the melanin in our brain, a melanin in our spinal cord, melanin in all of our organs, and the circulating melanin within our blood system. And our cerebral spinal fluid. Melanin is a chemical substance that I refer to as our direct line of communication to the Creator, to God. It is this melanin connection that people of African ancestry have that makes us more spiritual, that makes us accept other people's religion, because it's hardwired into our consciousness. It's this melanin in our cells, in our souls, that make us talk the way we talk, move the way we move, act the way we act, dance the way that we act. It is a special substance, a chemical substance that connects us in ways that other people are not connected. So that the downside of melanin is that melanin is an alkaloid chemical that binds to other alkaloid chemicals such as marijuana, heroin, and cocaine. So people with large concentrations of melanin, when they ingest those drugs, will get higher faster, stay higher longer, and have a more difficult time kicking those drugs because of the similarity in structure to melanin and the alkaloid elements within those cells. So back in the 80s, when the Kimware Science Consortium and the melanin scholarship was really strong, Europeans moved on all of the melanin scholars, Carol Barnes, Richard King, Hunter Adams, Lynn Jeffries, because this was a truthful message that had to be suppressed. And that's what we're fighting with. Evil people, soulless people, like what happened in Connecticut this past Friday. That is evidence of a being without a soul. No one, with the soul does anything like that. And as we know, there have been more mass murders in America than anywhere else on this planet. So what does that say about the soullessness spirit that is riding this nation right now, that black folk need to begin to understand and need to begin to come to grips with, so that we can separate ourselves from that soulless spirit and tap back into that spirit that has sustained us longer than anybody else on this planet, so that we can get this thing right and get up out of here.
I want to.
Great point.
Way to end this segment. I want to thank you for being with us this evening, and Dr. Browder, I want to be in touch with you during the week, because I want to talk about part 2 of this discussion. We didn't get to Christianity per se, but I think that's a heavy part of this discussion.
For sure, man. And listen, I'm going to be coming to Philly, I think it's on the 18th or 19th of January, doing a presentation. We're working out the details of that now. It's on a Saturday, the third Saturday in February. We'll be talking about this new film that Runoko Rashidi, James Small, and others are in, Hidden Colors 2. There's a segment in there that deals with religion. Check that out. Pick up a copy of my book, The Browder File. There's a chapter in there called Exploding Myths that deals with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and more specifically talks about this season, Christmas, and what we really should be doing. We should not be drinking. We should not be partying. It is the time for prayerful meditation and attuning ourselves with a spirit, with the force, with the consciousness that is there to work for us and through us.
I want to reach out to you next week.
Sounds good, brother.
Peace.
Take care. Peace.
I want to thank everybody for participating in the conversation this evening. Brother Timothy, we ran up against the clock, but you're always part of the family, and call next week. Lively discussion as always, and we'll be back next week, Lord willing, to continue on this path towards an awakening. Peace. Welcome back to Time for an Awakening, and tonight, again, as I stated, we're in part 2 of our discussion. We'll be joined in a moment by Dr. Tony Browder, author, publisher, historian, artist, and lecturer. Dr. Tony Browder is joining us to share again and continue the discussion on the African origin of Judaism and Christianity. Tonight, before we open up, I did want to, I'd be remiss to mention about the upcoming holiday of Christmas that is celebrated on the 25th. And that's one of the first questions I want to open up with Dr. Browder when he comes on. You know, it's time for us, we are coming into a new year to really start reassessing what we do as a people, the knowledge of ourselves, and moving forward. And certain things that we've been doing as a people, especially since we've been here in chattel enslavement, we really need to reassess. Going forward, we see the unemployment of our people. The unemployment rate for adults is still up around 13, 14%. Doesn't seem to be moving. And for black youth, 18 to about 32, it's around 41% nationally. So we see the picture is bleak if we just look for this country to be the salvation of our people. We really need to reach out to our youth and change the mindset and the thinking of our people moving forward. Everything needs to be on the table, whether it's religious belief, thoughts about culture. What we thought is parts of our culture might not be. Everything needs to be up for discussion and on the table. Tonight, we're in conversation again with Dr. Tony Browder. Dr. Browder.
Good evening, my brother. How are you?
How are you, sir?
I'm good. Glad to be back on so we can continue this discussion.
You know, I want to open up this evening with a question because I want you to really expound on this. You know, you talk with a lot of our people, and especially some conscious folk. When it comes to the holiday of Christmas, they say it's a totally made-up holiday because they see it's been frothed with Euro doctrine, European images, large fragments of European culture mixed in with other things. Talk about the historical opinion of where these... The reason I'm saying this is because we know that the culture or the basic building blocks of Western culture have definitely either been plagiarized, co-opted, or just straight out stolen from off the continent. Knowing that, is there any cultural significance to the holiday of Christmas?
All right, that's a good question. And let me just put some things in context. We're communicating with each other in English because our ancestors were enslaved by people from England. Were we enslaved in Mexico, we'd be speaking Spanish. Were we be, if we were in Brazil, we'd be speaking Portuguese. Wherever enslaved people go, they speak the language of their enslavers. They take on the traditions, the holidays, and the religions of their enslavers. And so part of the process of enslavement is not just a physical thing, but it's an emotional, it's a psychological, and it is a spiritual form of enslavement. So I do remember reading in this book called the Bible a statement that said, when I was a child, I thought like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. Mm-hmm. So as I began to learn more about my African roots, I began to see the distortions in the socialization processes that were imposed upon me, specifically the celebration of Christmas. Christmas has nothing to do with the birth of Jesus the Christ. And I say that because no person living can tell you when Jesus was born. Nobody knows when Jesus was born. December the 25th is celebrated as the birth of the person that we know today is Jesus the Christ, because at the Council of Nicaea, certain decisions were made to celebrate the birth of this man that they deified and said that he was the Son of God. And they selected that date of the 25th of December, and that date wasn't really ratified and put into existence as a uniform holiday until 350 A.D., 350 years after the birth of the man whose birthday we're celebrating. And the reason why December the 25th was chosen was because that was the day that was celebrated by hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world as the birth of the Son, the S-U-N, the Son. And since this man, Jesus, who was literally fabricated at the Council of Nicaea, was supposed to be the Son of God, then they adapted that date because it was already in use by people, and they wouldn't have to work too hard to get them to celebrate this new deity, if you will. So what's the significance of December the 25th? December the 25th falls 4 days after the winter solstice. The winter solstice, we just celebrated the winter solstice this past Friday, 21st of December at 6:12 a.m. Solstice is a Latin word which means sun is still. Sol means sun in Latin, and still means still. The sun is still. So on December the 21st, the winter solstice, the beginning of winter, for 4 days, the sun is still. That is, the length of the day does not increase nor decrease significantly during this 4-day period of time. So if you look in your newspaper, you'll find in the weather section the dates or the times for the rising and the setting of the sun, the moon, the stars, and the other planets. And you'll notice during the time of the solstice, the length of the day is the same during these 4 days. And then after the 4th day, on the 5th day, the length of the day begins to increase by 1 minute. And so in ancient times, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, it was taught that the sun was born since the length of the day increased. Now, that is the origin of that celebration. But now, we've got to understand how people refer to this on an emotional or psychological level. The sun is responsible for all life on this planet. If the sun were any closer to the earth, the atmosphere would boil away, the water would boil away, and this would be a dead rock. If the sun were any further away, if the earth was any further away from the sun than it is, then everything would freeze, and the earth would be a dead rock. So this relationship between the earth and the sun is critical. So in ancient times, the sun was representative of God, of the Creator of all life. So the sun was said to have been born on December the 25th. And the length of the day continues to increase by 1 minute per day until we reach the time of the equinox, which usually falls in March 21st. At the equinox, which is another Latin word, equa means equal, nox means night. So equal night is the time when we have 12 hours at night, which also means that we have 12 hours of daylight. So the length of the day is the same. And the sun then crosses over the celestial equator and begins to move from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. And this crossing over of the sun from the equator, from the south to the north, Christianity referred to as the Passover, or Judaism refers to as the Passover. And for a 3-day period of time, the sun is crucified or crucified on the equator as it passes over. And so this is where we get the whole celebration of Easter and the resurrection of Jesus. And so if we look at our calendar, we'll realize that the birthday of Jesus falls on December the 25th, even though nobody knows when Jesus was born. But the date of the celebration of his resurrection is never the same. It always changes. So why is that? It changes because Easter is always the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. Okay? So the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So essentially, brother, what we're talking about, what we're dealing with is something that 99.9% of people who practice Judaism, Christianity, and Islam don't understand, is that all of these religions, all of these theologies, if you will, are based on astronomical and theological teachings that derive from ancient Kemet. People have the symbols, but they lack the substance to understand what these spiritual times of year actually represent so that we can be in harmony with them, thus be in closer harmony to our Creator.
Tell me, Dr. Browder, because our people here always associate the celebration of Christmas with the birth of the corrupted name of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Tell me, when the Europeans first took power in northern Africa, northern and central Africa, and introduced Serapis, which later, to use the term from Dr. Ashford Kwesi, Serapis Jesus, we can see that when they introduced that Serapis into Egypt to make that a god among the people, that they used the introduction of the Serapis with some of the things that you're talking about now. True or untrue?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, one of the best ways to get somebody to embrace a new idea is to wrap it up in an old idea. All right, so you introduced this story about Serapis, which is identical in many regards to the story of Asar. It's identical in many regards to the story of Heru, a story that is thousands of years older than Serapis, thousands of years older than Jesus. So people already have a familiarity with it, so they don't just reject it because it sounds like what we've been practicing for thousands of years. So there's more of a willingness to embrace it if it's already in alignment with something that you know to be true.
Go ahead.
Dr. Browder, good evening.
Good evening.
I have a question. Now, if someone that's Christian or from the Judaism line of thinking or Islamic would say, well, if Kemet is so great, why is their civilization no longer in existence? What would be your feedback to that question?
The reality is, brother, nothing that comes stays. Nothing that goes is lost. The reality is Kemet is the oldest documented civilization on this planet. That civilization thrived for over 2,500 years. No nation on earth has even come close. The United States is not even 300 years old, and it's already on the decline. Rome fell. Greece fell. Israel, Jerusalem fell. And so nothing lasts forever. So it's a matter of having a historical perspective so that you can put things in their correct context.
And to follow that up, what would you say to someone who says that I was taught just believe in Jesus and have faith? What's the sense of me looking back into the history when it doesn't apply to my real life today, when all I have to do is believe in Jesus Christ and by the blood?
Well, the issue is and I'll put that question to someone, an African American person who shares that question with me. I would ask them, well, how's that working for you? Black folk embrace other people's, other cultures' religions more fervently than anyone we know, and we still catching hell. Yeah. We always catch hell because there's no way on earth your former oppressor, your former enslaver, your former colonizer is going to give you the keys to the power. And one of the best ways to convince you that you're on a good path is to make you believe in something that has no foundation. I would refer such a person, and one of the issues that you're dealing with is people who rely on faith alone. You can't really have this type of discussion with them because they aren't ready to receive that. So everybody has the right to believe whatever they want to believe, and I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. That's not my job. That's not my right. But for those who want to know, for those who want to understand why they're suffering and why praying to Jesus and giving their tithes every week is not changing the quality of their life, then I would suggest that they view this situation a little differently, and there are other sources that can give them information. There's a good friend of mine, Reverend Willie Wilson, who's the pastor of Union Temple Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and he wrote a book a couple of years ago entitled Releasing the Power Within Through Spiritual Dynamics. And in that book, he talked about when he went to Howard University's Divinity School, how every student in Howard University's Divinity School is taught of the publication written by Reverend C.C. Jones in 1842. Reverend C.C. Jones was a white man in Georgia who wrote a book entitled The Religious Instruction of the Negroes in the United States of America. This book was written specifically after slave revolts in the South, when white enslavers were afraid that black people would rise up and kill them. And so for the first time in U.S. history, the white government said, we have to make black people Christians. Because prior to that time, it was forbidden for enslaved Africans to be Christians. But what they stated specifically was, we will bring them into Christianity, but we will give them specific passages from the Bible that would teach them to be docile. So if you go to, you can Google Reverend C.C. Jones and download his entire publication. It's called The Religious Instructions of the Negroes in the United States. He gave 5 points in his religious instructions for the Negro. Said you give them specific points that, 1, God ordained slavery for the African heathen. Point number 2, God ordained whites in America to be slave masters. Point number 3, Christianity must not interfere with this divine order. Point 4, God permitted slavery in order to expose the slave to Christianity. And point number 5, which is probably the most significant point, is that slaves must learn to accept poverty on earth and to get their reward in heaven.
Wow.
So black folk who say that, I don't want to hear all of this stuff, I got Jesus and I believe, they are still playing out this misinformation campaign, misinformation propaganda campaign that was ingrained in their consciousness by Reverend C.C. Jones in 1842, and the vehicle that he used, the church vehicle that he used to teach this doctrine was the Church of Christ, the same church that I as a child grew up attending in Chicago, Illinois. So reading, studying history, understanding the source of religion ideology will free you like you're never supposed to be freed if you're willing to do the work.
Let's go to our first caller this evening, Brother Joe in Germantown. Joe?
Go to the next one. Joe hung up.
Okay.
Joe, turn off your radio, Joe.
Yeah.
You're listening to yourself.
We lost Joe. Joe, give us a call back. Let's go to Timothy in South Philadelphia. Timothy?
Yes. How are you, brothers?
How are you, sir?
Elliot and Reggie and Dr. Browder.
I'm good.
Good. Dr. Browder, I have a lot of respect and know some of your work and willing to learn more and more. But here's the subject, sir. I want to go beyond religion, and I want to talk about the Dogon people. And if you're able to expound upon it, I'd like to know what their connection was with the universe, how they studied, what was their connection with maybe flying aircraft or having some connection with people that look like us who flew aircraft. Is it true that their helmets were in the shape of some type of antenna on the top of it, and that they were very close in harmony with the universe and the universal order of things? And what connections did they have with writing on the hieroglyphs? And is it a scientific way in which they lived their lives that has been buried beneath the sands, and it's very hard for us to piece it back together? Is this all true, or is this...
All right, brother, you're asking a lot of questions, and we're not going to be able to go into everything tonight because we're focusing specifically on the holiday season. But just to answer a couple of your key questions, the Dogon of Mali...
And thanks for your call, Tim.
Yeah, sure.
...are descendants of Africans from the Nile Valley. When Kemet came under invasion from Libyans, from Europeans, from Arabs, there were continuous migrations of priests, teachers, healers, and other wise people from the Nile Valley south and west into the African continent. There were 6 major migrations out of the Nile Valley. And the last migration, the 6th migration, was that of those Africans who went into Mali, into Dogon land. So there has been shown to be a close connection, a spiritual connection, astronomical connection, and linguistic connection between the Dogon and the people of ancient Kemet. So you'll find a awareness of the star Sirius, which the Dogon referred to as Potolo, and Sirius was known as Sahu. Sirius was known as Sepedet to the people of the ancient Egyptians. So there's a host of connections, and you raise a lot of questions, and it would take another show just to delve into them. But there's a lot of truth to some of the things that you raised, brother.
Dr. Browder, can you give the listening audience information, a connection with the Star David and some of the earlier roots? I believe that there are some roots with the triangle facing up and down, dealing with the female and male principle over in Hindu.
Yeah. Well, listen. What we have been taught was the Star of David. Jews refer to this symbol as the Star of David. Muslims refer to it as the Seal of Solomon. That symbol was known to the people of ancient Kemet as Sepedet. Sepedet is this star that the Greeks call Sirius. Sirius is a star that was known to the Dogon as Potolo. Sirius is the brightest star in our sky, second only to the sun, and that this particular star is a binary star, which means that there are 2 stars rotating on their orbit around each other. And I just read recently that Sirius is probably, in fact, a trinary star system. But let me just focus on those 2 stars. Those 2 stars were associated in the teachings of ancient Kemet as associated with Aset, who we know by her Greek name Isis, and her son Heru, who we know by his Greek name Horus. So that those 2 stars were represented by a equilateral triangle. The triangle pointing up represents Heru, the masculine energy symbol. The triangle pointing down represents Aset, or feminine energy, that is associated with water and magnetism. The triangle pointing up is associated with the sun and electricity. So these 2 symbols superimposed upon each other give us this sign that we now refer to as the Seal of Solomon or the Star of David. But what this symbol actually represents in a deeper context in ancient Kemet was the balance and harmony of the masculine and feminine energy that exists on this planet and throughout the universe. The balance and harmony of the sun and the moon, the balance and harmony of electrical energy and magnetic energy, or what we refer to today as electromagnetic energy. Everything within the physical universe exists because of this balance between electromagnetic energy. Every cell in our body is made up of electrons and protons. Right? So this same energy is the essence of life. And so the greater essence of life is maintaining a balance with this energy so that we will have life. So this symbol, the Star of David, the Seal of Solomon, this same symbol was adapted in the Hindu tradition, as you mentioned earlier, brother, because as the Africans moved out of the Nile Valley, they moved east into India as well. And so it represents a lost knowledge, if you will, of the profound concept of ma'at, balance, harmony, order, reciprocity, that are the hallmarks for the maintenance of all life on this planet.
Well, we're going to keep this flow going since we're talking about that balance within the equilateral triangle. Can you let the listener audience know the connection with that money that you're spending right now for these on this holiday tradition?
Well, all right, I see where you're going.
Okay.
On the back of the money, on the back of the dollar bill, you have the Great Seal of the United States. That Great Seal was commissioned by George Washington, and it took 6 years for 3 different teams of artists and experts in the art of heraldry or symbol making to come up with that design. So it wasn't something that was just haphazardly thrown together. And so there's several interesting things that you notice on the Great Seal. You see the eagle, and in this symbol, the Great Seal is the same symbol that you see on the podium whenever the President of the United States speaks. So the President, every President of the United States, stands behind this symbol. It supersedes him. So it is more important than him because of the symbolic essence that it represents. You see the eagle holding numerous objects in his talons, 13 arrows, holding an olive branch with 13 leaves and 13 olives. You see a chest on a shield with 13 stripes. You see a banner in his mouth with the words E pluribus unum, which is 13 letters. You see above his head a cluster of 13 stars, which form the Seal of Solomon, or the Star of David, or Sepedet. Right? So all of these symbols exist on the Great Seal because the people who crafted that symbol, the people who created the United States of America, just happened to be members of a Masonic order, and they used those symbols in order to represent the extension of ancient Nile Valley history, culture, science, and traditions here in the New Egypt, which is what the United States of America is.
Oh, boy. We're going to continue hearing the lecture in the communiversity. And if you want to participate, give us a call at 215-634-8065. That's 215-634-8065. And our online listeners that asked some questions to Brother Reggie during the week about last week's program, call up. It's a toll-free number, 1-866-361-0900. That's 1-866-361-0900. We're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back with Dr. Tony Browder. Welcome back. It's time for an awakening, and we're joined this evening in conversation for part 2 of our discussion with Dr. Tony Browder. The African origin of Judaism and Christianity is the topic tonight. And let's go right back to the phones. We have Donald in Feltonville. Donald?
It's Jumbo there, my brother.
How are you,
Donald?
Hey, very powerful show, man. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm getting so much out of this. And I was just wondering, when I prayed, I I don't pray to a single deity. I pray to the great Creator. I was wondering, with this this format here, is as a black man, as an African, as an Ethiopian, as a Moor, whatever they want to call us, you understand? Whatever we want to call ourselves in this case, and I want to call myself an original, and I would like to know the original name that our people pray to. When we were writing things down, when we were making hieroglyphics, when we were building pyramids, when we were showing the world studies in sciences and math and astrology. And my last question is, about what time was this prophet called Jesus born, so that I can relate this to other people in my family. And once again, a very powerful program. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for bringing the wisdom. Thank you, Red.
Not a problem, my brother. Jumbo.
Jumbo, man, because I love y'all, man. Keep up the great work. Much love, and please be safe out there. And I'm listening.
Thank you for your call, Donald. Dr. Browder?
Sure. Just to kind of give a brief response to a couple of his questions. The person that we know as Jesus was born based on the latest archaeological evidence, was born around 4 BC, before the Common Era. The reason why we use the term BC and AD was because of a Roman priest by the name of Dionysius Exodus, who recalibrated the calendar and introduced this term over 1,000 years after Jesus was supposedly born. But we still aren't clear because there is no concrete evidence. We're still dealing with theories. Theologians and preachers are still dealing with theories because they do not know. There are many names that were used by African people to refer to the deity, the great unseen creator. And all of those names are legitimate because that is how those people saw the creator. So, to my knowledge, some of the oldest Nile Valley names for the unseen presence of God were Amen, Atun. You had Heru was a manifestation of the unseen creator. Asar was another manifestation of the creator. And so we have these terms, the Neteru or Neters, and there were different names for different Neters who represented the different aspects of the one creator. So what I would suggest to your caller and to anybody who's interested in making a connection, the name that you call is important, but what's even more important is what's in your heart, the energy that is in your heart. So, that's what's really important. And if I can say before we go on, I want to make a comment about the piece that you played during this last break with Dr. King. Mm-hmm. Such a wonderful comments that he made about different aspects of history and our culture, and even the names, how we refer to ourselves, the significance of black and white. But it reminded me of when he said that somebody told you a lie when they were talking about our names. It reminded me of that song written by Ashford and Simpson, who said somebody told a lie and said heaven was in the sky. Throw it out the window, say I. Heaven is right here on earth. Hell is right here on earth. And there are Jewish rabbis who know this, who know that heaven doesn't exist. Hell doesn't exist. There are people in the Vatican who know that there is no such place as hell. There is no such place as heaven. Those are states of consciousness that exist right now. But that thinking is reserved for a handful of people who can think and do not take what is written in the Bible and the Torah and the Quran literally, because these texts were never meant to be taken literally.
Go ahead, Ray.
Dr. Browder, can you tell the listening audience a little bit about Coptic or Egyptian Christians?
Well, let me back up and put some things in context for you again.
Okay.
Because what we're dealing with is control of the minds of the people. Control of the minds of the people. So because Kemet was was the source of knowledge and power. She was constantly subjected to invasion and conquest, because people only steal from people who have something. You don't steal from a thief. You don't steal from a poor man. You steal from people who have something. So when the oppressors came in, they began to see that there was so much wealth and power in Kemet that they had to find ways to devalue Kemet in the eyes of everyone else. So part of that process of devaluing Kemet was to suppress all of the teachings of the Netru, all of the teachings of God that preceded the advent of Christianity. And so in 391 ACE, there was a Roman emperor by the name of Theodosius who closed all of the temples of Kemet. And he executed all of the priests so that no one would exist who could translate Medu Neter and tell folk who were learning the Bible that, oh, no, that's a mistranslation from the original text. So all of those priests were killed, and all of the temples were closed. And by 394 ACE, the language of our ancestors, Medu Neter, the writing of God, ceased to be written again. They had so thoroughly erased the competition. And then in 527 ACE, Justinian, who was another Roman emperor, closed the very last temple in ancient Egypt where these teachings were taught. That was the temple in the island of Philae. And you can go to Philae today, and you will find that Philae, inscribed on the walls of the temple of Philae, is the story of Set, the virgin Set, giving birth to her son, Heru, on December the 25th. Giving birth to her son, Heru, in a field of marshes. And as the story goes, Set sought to kill Heru because he saw him as challenging his reign in Kemet. So Set had to flee, and she fled south into Philae, into this area of what we now call Nubia, where she and her son were safe. Right? So if you contrast that to the story of Moses and Joseph and Jesus fleeing Israel and coming where? To Egypt. Mm-hmm. All right, because Herod was going to kill the son who threatened his legacy. It's the same story. It's the very same story. So you have to be able to have your historical memory restored. So what happened was after the knowledge of Kemet was destroyed, and Christianity began to be introduced into Egypt at that time, there were a series of priests who embraced that story because it was so much like the story of Asar, Set, and Heru. And these were the people who came to be known as the Coptics, right? And so the Coptics were able to use the last vestiges of Medu Neter, or so-called hieroglyphics, and incorporated that into the writing that became known as Coptic. So Coptic is a derivative of Medu Neter. And so we find that elements of the ancient Kemetic traditions were hidden in this new form of Christianity, which took hold first in Egypt. The oldest Christian monastery is in Egypt. The first group of monks to advocate Christianity came out of Egypt. Right? So all of these documents, if we're very clear about Nile Valley being the origin of Christianity, we don't have to go to Israel. We will find all of this information in the Nile Valley, and it's still there waiting to be studied, waited to be interpreted and incorporated into people's lives.
Dr. Browder, I have one other question for you.
Yes, sir.
Now, people who study the Bible and text know about the ransacking of Alexandria, Egypt, the library.
Mm-hmm.
There's a name that I'm just now becoming familiar with, General Ammar. I think he might have been Arabian. He was either Arabian or Muslim that was part of the ransacking of Alexandria, Egypt. Have you heard of Ammar?
Okay, I'm not familiar with Ammar, but what I can tell you is that there were several efforts to to ransack the Library of Alexandria, which at its time was the greatest repository of knowledge in the world. But the greatest destruction to that occurred during the time of the Roman conquest of Egypt, when supposedly the library was accidentally burned. And with the burning of the library, we're talking about thousands of ancient texts just disappeared. And when I say disappeared, they weren't all burned. Many people and many Muslims took these texts with them and studied these texts. And that's how they became masters of the world after Europe fell into the Dark Ages. It was Islam which saved Europeans from the Dark Ages. When the Moors began to come into Spain in 711, they brought them out of the Dark Ages. They civilized them, taught them how to read, write, and reason. That's why there was this old saying, "Oh, thank heaven for 711." That's when the Africans came in and brought light into Europe and ended brought light into Egypt and brought light into Europe and began to bring this ancient information, which had been destroyed, into Europe. But it came in this time through a Arabic interpretation. Similar knowledge, just reinterpreted through a different cultural lens.
Let's go to Jacob and Ollie. Jacob?
Peace be unto you, brothers, Reggie and Elliot. How y'all doing?
Good. How you doing, Jacob?
Yeah, I got a question for him, but, I heard him say that there's no place called heaven or hell, right? When I studied it, what Egypt had even. I mean, you look at King Tut. He even believed in an afterlife because in his tomb he thought he could take all his things with him, And the Pharaoh Akhenaten, he taught one God. You're right? So, but I want to ask the doctor, can you prove that there's not a heaven or hell after this life is over, after we're put 6 foot in the ground, the physical body? Can you prove that there's not a heaven or hell?
All right, let me back up.
Thank you for your question, Jacob.
Thank you, brother, for your question. But let me back up for a second. King Tut, Akhenaten, and all of the kings of ancient Kemet did not believe in the concept of heaven or hell like we have been taught to interpret that. If you really understand what the tradition that these people were carrying on, it's a tradition that comes down through the so-called pyramid text from the Pyramid of Unas, the last king of the 5th dynasty. They talked about the souls of the deceased going into the heavens, going into the constellation of Orion, where that soul would be reborn, and then that soul would come back to Earth. So the afterlife is your soul coming back to Earth, right? That's what they were talking about. So your soul coming back to Earth would mean that when the spirit came back into the afterlife, the next life here on Earth, then based on the quality of life that you live would determine whether or not you would catch hell here on Earth in the next life or live a relatively comfortable life, heaven, relatively speaking, on Earth. So it's here. It's here.
Sounds like the concept of the New Jerusalem to me.
Well, I mean, but see, the thing that we're dealing with is, and I'm not here to try to convince anybody of anything. That's not my job. I don't have the right to try to convince anybody of anything. Everybody's entitled to believe whatever you want to believe. All I'm suggesting is that if what you've been believing is not working well for you, then maybe there's some other things that you should check out so that you can know what you're doing as opposed to believing in something. It's the difference between belief and knowledge, a profound difference.
So when you're talking about heaven and hell, the way that was spoken in the past in Kemet, you're not speaking of a destination or a particular place. Is that what you're stating?
No. I'm saying the place is here.
Okay, no, I just want to be.
But we go through a process.
Okay.
See, if we think about, in this whole process of mummification, which is an Arabic word, I hate using that word, but your audience is familiar with it. The whole idea was to turn that person into Sahu. Sahu was the resurrected Asar. So it's a matter of taking people through a process so that their soul could be reborn here on Earth. Right? The soul could be reborn here on Earth. And if you've lived a righteous life, That is, if you follow the admonitions of Ma'at, then you can live in heaven on earth. So it's all here, right now. So these teachings were designed to help you develop the best aspects of life in this life and the next life when you come back. Now, let me just share something with your listeners that is not commonly known, but even among selected rabbis of the Jewish tradition, they know about what we call reincarnation. They accept it, they embrace it. That's why they don't believe in heaven and hell. Any Jew who has studied the Torah knows that heaven and hell does not exist. All right? And in ancient Kemet, that the term that describes what we call reincarnation, that term was Rehimi Mesu, which is the repetition of the birth. Our souls are repeatedly reborn here on the earthly plane of existence. So when we understand that story and can look at it in a historical context, in a spiritual context, then who is Heru? Heru represents the reincarnation of Asar. So that we see it played out in the lives of every king in Kemet. Every king, when he ascends to the throne, takes on his Heru name. He becomes the manifestation of Heru. And when he dies, he then becomes Asar. All right? And if he becomes Asar, that then opens the door, the way for him to be reborn again. So it's about a process of the continual renewal of life, which is what we see in the sun during the time of the solstice. The sun is dead. The sun dies, but it is reborn on December the 25th. The sun is crucified, but it comes back when it passes over. So these are all stories, if you will, about rebirth and renewal. And that's what life is all about, brothers and sisters.
Dr. Browder, I want to thank you for being with us this evening.